Welcome to this edition of Soul of Warren County. I'm your host, Mickey Gwynn. Tennessee lies in an area of our country well known as the Bible Belt. And Warren County, like many locations in the Bible Belt, has numerous houses of worship for various religious denominations that dot the landscape. But there's always been one question that seems like follows churches and religion, and that is, does their obligations end with just the spiritual fulfillment of their congregation? Or should they have a louder voice in issues that affect our country, especially social issues? We're going to talk about that today and other things with my guest, the pastor of North Hills Church of God of Prophecy, Pastor Michael Harris. Brother Harris, welcome to Soul of Warren County.
It's a pleasure to be here.
I always like to start off our programs with a little bit of a trip down memory lane. Talk to us a little bit about young Michael Harris back in the day.
The young Michael Harris really enjoyed living here. No, I was born here, really had a great childhood. Our neighborhood was close-knit, riding horses, playing football in the neighbor's yard. Just really enjoyed being here and all the people that we were able to meet, and it was just a good time, good era to grow up in. We were some of the only people in our neighborhood to have horses, so we'd get out about every evening, ride, and let the neighbors ride, and then of course you had your bicycles, you'd get around and just go and do and just have a lot of fun. Yeah. Of course, I went to school here in my early years. As you know, I moved around a lot with my dad and doing telephone work. Wherever he got a job, our family would move there. So we moved around a lot. So I wasn't here a great deal when I was young, but I saw fit to come back here and make my home here. This is always Warren County has always been a great place for family.
Yeah. Now, when you were living here, where were y'all living at that time?
In Leesburg.
Leesburg, that's what I thought.
Yes.
I thought you were out in Leesburg. Yeah, I had family out in Leesburg too, and we grew up sort of the same way with horses and bicycles. I know we never personally had a horse. My cousin had horses. I always wanted a horse, but I thought about an old story. My cousin Robert Biles, and they had a horse, and we were out riding the horse one day in their little corral there, and I was on it bareback, no reins, no saddle, no nothing, and the horse headed toward the barn. And we would always had been told, never let the horse take you to the barn. You know, there'll be bad things that happen. Right. So we're heading toward the barn, and I'm trying to think of what am I going to do? I got to get off this horse. So my bright idea was to jump off the horse and grab the fence post. So I jumped off the horse. I missed the fence post, and face planted myself in the ground. I mean, I got up, and he, of course, he's my cousin. He's laughing at me, and I've got scratches all on my face. I barely can see. And I go home. We live right across the street. And we go home. My mom said, "I told you not to go over there anyway." And look at you. And I'm looking, and I'm seeing double and everything. All my mom is concerned about is the fact that I, violated the rules and went over there anyway. But yeah, we had fun back in those days. You don't realize sometimes how dangerous maybe things were, but we always had fun.
I was kind of the cowboy of our bunch, of me and my brothers.
Right.
Both my brothers got a horse first, and then my dad finally found me one, and it was a pinto pony.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
But it was a stud horse, so when it got around a mare, it didn't want to move unless the mare moved.
Right.
But I finally learned the trick on it. I would put my feet in his flanks, which would make him kick.
Right.
And after a while, he got to where he stopped kicking, and he would stand up on his back legs and just start walking. Well, back then, the Lone Ranger and Tonto was, that was a popular show.
Right, right.
So I'd just throw a hand in the air and say, "Hi-ho, Silver." Of course, I hit the ground once or twice. Right. But everybody got a kick out of that, I thought I was a real cowboy.
Right. We were the same way, and I often tell the story, grow up as a kid, we all had stick horses.
Yes.
I don't know if you remember back in the old days that there was a sawmill down at the end of between Beersheba and Main Street. There was a sawmill down there, an active sawmill, huge sawdust pile down there. And we used to go down there and get scraps of wood for our stick ponies. And we'd go get them, and we'd always race. We'd race up the street. Who had the fastest horse. And I always kept I never could win. I had some my cousin Robert was the fastest kid in the county during high school. He was very fast. And I never could beat him. I never could beat some of my other cousins and everything. And I always blamed it on that stick horse. You know, I'd go back and get another one, and I still would lose. You know, but you know, yeah, you are as a kid. I'm thinking it's the horse, it's the stick. It ain't me.
That's right.
You know, later in life, I realized, well, yeah, it was you. That's why you couldn't win. It wasn't the horse. But like you say, back in the good old days.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, talk about a little bit of the journey to the ministry. Then you talk about you had a good time back in the day. How did that transition come about?
As I said, I had a really good childhood, but I've always liked books. And when my siblings would say, if they threw away a book, I would go and pull it out of the garbage can, and I would save it, I'd read it, study it. And then, of course, we always went to church, and I began to read the Word of God. And as I read, the more I would read. Mm-hmm. And I just began to dive deeper and deeper. And then I was about 14, 15, and I felt the call into the ministry. Now, at that time, when a person said they were called into the ministry, most people, the way they understood it would be, they would vocalize it by saying, I'm called, I feel the Lord calling me to preach. Even though the ministry is very diverse in different types of ministry and so forth, but that was just vocabulary that most people use.
Right.
But as I felt that call, I went to my mom and I told Mom, I said, Mom, I really feel the Lord's calling me into ministry. And my mother, she looked at me and she said, well, son, whatever the Lord tells you to do, that's what you need to do. She said, if you feel His call, then pursue that. And so that's what I began to do. I gathered material, books, everything I could get, and just began to study, because throughout my life, I've done a lot of self-education.
Right.
If I see a subject matter that I like, I would just gather up all the material on it and begin to study it and try to learn something from it. But as I grew, as I said earlier, we moved a lot. So depending on what area we were in, that's the church we would go to. But we always went out here at Martin Chapel. That was a church I can remember the Easters and Christmases, and we would go there and attend there. East End Church of Christ, Eastern Drive, we would go up there.
Right.
And excuse me, I can remember my grandmother, she lived down the street. And so we would be at her house because we lived right beside her, and we would walk to church and then come back, and she always fixed dinner right after church.
Yes.
Sunday dinner, So, but the Lord just kept dealing with me, and as I continue on, I moved away, stayed away for many years, and finally come back to this area. When I did, I began to attend different churches in the area, and I found myself actually attending a church in Spencer, Tennessee. I know.
Interesting.
Interesting, yes. And I was there, and at that time I was writing songs. And the pastor there, I shared some of the songs I had written, and they began to have a conversation with me and said, you know that you are supposed to be doing more than writing songs. And I understood that. I understood the call. And but then it wasn't long before I started attending West Riverside Church of God of Prophecy, and that's really where I started going fully into my calling as far as doing ministry. I started there as a youth minister, and I remained as a youth minister for a couple of years. Years went by. I was appointed as associate pastor there under Walid Ajamu. I was associate pastor under him for 5 years. Then he was moved, and Bishop Timothy Scotton was appointed pastor there, and I was his associate pastor for 4 years.
Okay.
And then I moved to the church where I am now. That is a interesting story.
Yeah, and we're going to get into that story also. But it seems like maybe you didn't have like a mentor during that time. It seemed like you were sort of doing your own study and sort of finding your own way. So during that time, 'cause I know often you'll find pastors who maybe come from a family
Right.
of preachers and things in the past, or were really admired maybe a particular pastor's style or the way he
Yes.
presented the word and things of that nature. But it seemed like you did a lot of self-study and sort of found your own way around.
Yes. Yeah, I didn't actually have one mentor. I had people in my family that, of course, that I looked up to that gave me direction and guidance. My mom, my dad, my grandfather, and others in the family that gave me direction. But as far as having a mentor in the ministry, I didn't have that. But one thing I still, I've done a lot of courses, a lot of classes, and all this stuff throughout the years. But one thing I still say to people that really impacted me probably more than anything I've ever done is just the desire to know God more, know more about Him, know Him personally, intimately, to have that real relationship with Him. And as you study the Word, there's a draw there that will draw the heart that, you will want to know Him more. And so that desire to just really know who He is and all the things that He does, when we look at a starlit sky and you realize that the Creator of all of the universe created this for your enjoyment, it was just a deep desire within me to please the Lord and to know Him.
Have you found it difficult to try to express that feeling to others?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I can imagine. So that there's always that thought of how does that feel when you just know. But
Yes.
obviously you knew early on what you wanted to do, and you just grew till you got to the point to where you were able to go forward with that. Yeah, and I'm sure that's hard to explain, that feeling that you get.
Yes, it is. It's something that is very difficult to articulate to people and share with them what's in your heart. I can remember being in it was a ministry event, and I remember being in a room with there was about 30 or 40 of us, pastors, ministers, evangelists, and there was a lady going around the room asking each person, what is your passion? And as she went around the room, there were several ahead of me, and I'm thinking, what is my real passion? And when it came to me, I only had one real answer, or one answer that I could share with her, and that is that my passion was to see people so blessed by the Lord that they will say, look what the Lord has done. That they could honestly look at their life and say, this is what the Lord has done for me, and this is where He's brought me from. So my greatest blessing and my greatest passion is to see God bless people. And when I see that, and I see people just being tremendously blessed by the Lord, that brings joy to my heart.
No. You mentioned about when you established your first church, but your first preacher,
Assistant
first
pastor.
assistant pastor, and then you wanted to be the pastor at North Hills. We were talking about that. I wanted to read a passage to you that I actually prepared for a little bit of a presentation I did back on during Black History Month.
Okay.
And it's very interesting. It's from 1964, and it's from a gentleman by the name of Kyle Hazelden, and he himself was a minister. And he wrote an op-ed for the New York Times, and he entitled that op-ed, 11 a.m. Sunday, Our Most Segregated Hour. And he goes on to talk about how in our country, with the various religion, and as religious a country we are, during that time, we're a very segregated nation. It's just sort of like, the blacks, whites, other religion, we're just very separate when it comes to church time during Sunday morning. You mentioned about your very interesting journey because you are actually pastor at a church that is predominantly white. How do you feel about the situations of like his words about being such a segregated society when it comes to religion and church time on Sundays, and then your journey? Because obviously that wasn't a barrier, I would think. I mean, you may tell me different, but it seemed like that wasn't a barrier for either you or the congregants at that time.
I don't know, did you give a date on that?
Yeah, that was 1964.
64.
Yeah.
And of course, in 64 and 65, the Civil Rights Bill
Very
was
much
passed.
so.
60 through 64, a lot of unrest in the country. great division in people of color, of all people, of all races. So I could understand why that statement was made. You had the black church, you had the white church, you had Hispanic churches, the Chinese, different groups had their thing. But I truly believe that the Lord never meant for it to be that way. I believe that there are only one people. If you go back in Scripture and you go back to Noah, Noah and his family were the only descendants that lived past the flood. In the beginning, there was only Adam and Eve. So they had the gene pool to create all people, all nationalities of people. And people were created by whatever geographical location that would end up being their nationality. So you have all these diverse groups of people. And it was never meant for it to be a black and white, brown thing. It was meant that the Lord meant for us to be one people.
Right, right.
But as that statement was made, and I have actually read that statement before in one of the writings of Martin Luther King Jr., in one of his sermons, he made that same statement. And at that era of time, I would have no doubt that that was probably a true statement. But I am also grateful to be able to say that we have passed that point, that churches and the people in the churches are coming together because they're beginning to understand more so that if we are to truly walk in the footsteps of Christ, then we must love like Christ. He loved the Jews. He loved the Gentiles. All the different nationalities, the Samaritans, the Samaritan woman at the well was one of those that really spoke to the issue of race and gender. So he loved all people, and he meant for us to be together, to love one another and not be divided. In my local church, as you said, I was the first pastor of color to be appointed there. And when I went there to help the pastor that was there, Bishop Orville Simpson was there. He invited me to come and do a couple of services for him. I did. So he called me later on and he asked me, he said, would you come back and basically run the church for me? He allowed me to know he was sick. And he was not able to maintain the church like he wanted to. So he asked me, would I come and do all the preaching? And I told him I would. And he said, well, I will pay you. If you'll come, I'll pay you. And I said, now, Bishop Simpson, it's like this. I said, I work a job every day, and the Lord provides for my needs, so you don't have to pay me anything. I said, the Word teaches us that we're to help folks wherever we can help, and wherever we can help and whatever we can do to be a blessing, that's what we're supposed to do. So I went there, and with that understanding, it was, let's see, that was in 2004. In 2005, he passed away. So at his funeral, in the Church of God of Prophecy, we have a state bishop. And the state bishop, he appoints pastors to the church, to whatever local church. There's, let's see, there's over 100 churches here in Tennessee, Church of God of Prophecy. Right. And so he came to me and he said, well, I just have had something happen that has never happened before to me. And I said, what is that? He said, well, a lot of the people of the church gathered around me and told me that you are their pastor, that you are not going anywhere, that I'm not going to appoint anyone to that church, that you are their pastor. Now, understanding it's his authority, it's within his authority to make that appointment, no one else's. And I said, well, you know, and he said, well, I want you to pray about it and consider it. And I said, I definitely would. My wife and I, we would definitely give it prayer. And I felt the will of God that that's where we should be, and so did my wife. So, and we've been there now, it's been 17 years.
So have you felt any type of issues being that you're a pastor of color at the church? Has any of those type of issues even risen since you've been there?
Excuse me. Not per se color,
right?
But culture.
Culture, okay.
Because you have such a difference in black culture and white culture. So there were some cultural barriers that we had to get over. People of color are more animated.
Right.
We're more colorful, so to speak, for lack of better words. So there were some culture issues. You take, for example, music. Most of the churches in the South, they're going to be Southern gospel. Now I give it, or considering that in the recent years, contemporary music has really come forward. But for the many years, it was Southern gospel, and especially in this area, that
Right.
was it. You know, so dealing with the music aspect and us being used to the tambourine and just that upbeat and all that, and then coming to Southern gospel, it was a challenge. But the way I look at that is, no matter what your style of music is, as far as your preference, if it's something that is really uplifting the Lord, then we should be able to worship to anything.
And that's interesting. You mentioned that you growing up, y'all attended the East End Drive Church of Christ, and Church of Christ is probably one of the most subdued church services you'll ever go to. So it's interesting that you said that part of the culture was a little bit of a point when you first started there. But obviously, after all these years, they have definitely embraced you, and obviously you've embraced them also. I mentioned in the lead-in about churches' roles and social issues and things of that nature. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. You mentioned the civil rights era, and for African Americans during the civil rights era, the church was pivotal in that movement. I mean, if you look at Dr. Martin Luther King and the bombing in Birmingham, the church was very vital and pivotal in that movement during that time. Today, there's not quite the same type of social issues. There's more outlets to address your concerns about social issues and things of that nature. But how do you feel a church's role should be in social issues? Do you feel the churches are vocal enough the way they are? Do you feel they should just take care of the spiritual needs, I mentioned, of their congregation, let the other things take care of themselves? How do you feel about that?
I truly believe that the church should, first and foremost, deal with the spiritual needs of their people, mentoring, discipling, and so forth. But on the same hand, if we are to use Christ as a model, then we are to be vocal as far as dealing with social issues. The Lord tells us that we are to feed the hungry, clothe the naked. We should offer help to the helpless, hope to the hopeless, in whatever manner that would best fit our local congregation. When it comes to the issues of injustice, if you're going to preach the word, then you're going to have to touch on that. Now I understand that some would like to stay in the middle of the road and never touch issues, social issues. But if you're going to disciple your people, you need to make sure they're well-rounded, and that you address also the social issues that come before us. And I was actually thinking about that, and Martin Luther and many of the ministers that stood up during the civil rights era. I would dare say that if they had not stood up, that it may have taken many more years for the Civil Rights Bill to be passed. But the Lord used Martin Luther King Jr. To be basically the leader of that movement among the people, and he used his influence as a minister and the gifting that gave him to help all people, not just black people, but all people. And I think that's one of the things we oftentimes overlook, is that what he did was not just for black people. It was for all people of color, and we all have some type of color.
Right. Yeah, very much so. Appreciate that, because I think it can be a touchy subject, especially when you're trying to look at your personal faith and your beliefs and things of that nature, and a lot of the issues that are going on in our nation. So I really appreciate that. Me and you have been sort of on committees, and we're on the board of the Black History Museum for a number of years yet, and we've had some really good conversations over the last 2 to 3 years. And the thing that I've always appreciated about you're very straightforward, very honest, and I think there can be some times where people of faith, not necessarily a pastor, but just people of faith, they almost throw that on you. Hey, look, I'm a pastor, and all I'm going to talk about is religion and the Lord, things of that nature. And you just are so well-rounded. I mean, you can sit down and you know from talking to you where your beliefs are and things of that nature. But it's not like something that you just sort of pound into someone in just a regular conversation. And I've always appreciated that.
Well, I appreciate that. But my thought pattern is this: if you're living what you're preaching, you won't have to preach so much.
Never thought of it that way.
Right now, if I was in church, I'd say hallelujah or glory. I might even shout.
Yeah.
But it's truth. If you're living what you're preaching, then you really won't have to preach so much and come down on people, because we should be offering help. And when we do, we should let that person know where that comes from. It comes from a sincere place in our hearts, and it comes because we love the Lord, and we allow people to know the Lord loves them in spite of their circumstance, in spite of their situation, in spite of their struggles. He still loves them, and He's there to help them, just like He did us. I think sometimes people in ministry forget the struggles they went through.
Right.
And the tragedies and traumas, perplexing predicaments that took place in their life. They forget about those things, and all they want to do is the word, the word, the word. Now, I'm not taking anything away from the preached word,
right,
but preaching, pulpit preaching has its place, but also a one-on-one ministry has its place. That's what I was basically talking about as the diversity of ministry when God calls you to minister. Usually before you can really minister the word to a person, you need to build a relationship with them. Because there's three things people are really looking for. Back when we were young, they called it the 3 R's, reading, writing, arithmetic.
Right.
Well, these are the 3 R's of religion. People are looking for someone that is real. They're looking for someone that is relatable, and they're looking for someone that's relational. If you are those 3 things, people will give you a listening ear, but not just being cordial to you.
Right.
They'll really listen because they hear your heart, and they know that you really are desiring for them to be blessed.
Well, I think you epitomize those 3 R's. I can say
thank you,
I
sir.
really appreciate the conversations that we've had over the last few years, and if you don't mind, I'd like to have you back sometime. I just enjoy our talks.
Yeah,
I mean, I
absolutely.
really just enjoy our talks, and I like what you presented to us today. And if you'd be willing to come back, I'd like to have you back
I'd
again.
enjoy that. I'd enjoy that.
All right,
Absolutely.
appreciate it, and thanks again.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mead.
And thank you. Please join us again for the next episode of The Soul of Warren County. Until then, make this day and every day a great day.